Okay, welcome. My name is Mathur, CEO of AFN. And one of the things that we think about a lot in AFN is that change is where opportunity happens. And the best way to find opportunity in change is a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. With our events, we bring in a subject matter expert or someone who's really had an interesting experience in one particular area that we can all learn from in some way, shape, or form. Today, really excited to be hanging out with Vikrant Mathur. He's co-founder at Future Today. Seems like it's been a long trip. You guys started it in 2006. It's an advertising video on-demand platform around content delivery. And the topic that we're really focused on here is around bootstrapping a business. And we live in Silicon Valley, Vikrant and I think there's a lot of pressure to be raising capital from outside folks. But you guys took the path to bootstrap the whole way. Welcome, Vikrant. Awesome to have you here.
Thank you, Matt. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you and a partner started Future Today, right?
Yeah. So to be fair, it was me and my partner Alok, but we had other friends who were interested, who wanted to help out. With some of them, it was a short-term project, right? Honestly, we didn't know where this was going to go. So, we were sort of playing it by the day, week, month, year. But we did have help. We had, other friends who wanted to get involved and, be part of something exciting and new. So, had many hands, part of this project.
Cool. Well, and so, when you guys were starting out, and so it sounds like, you're figuring out what you were going to be initially, which is the case with a lot of startups. How early did you make the decision not to take external capital?
It was, pretty early on, but, to be brutally honest, I would say it was not out of choice, perhaps out of necessity, and perhaps a blessing in disguise. So in 2006, when we launched, we had bootstrapped the first version of the product, and everybody who was involved in the company, all of us had full-time jobs. And so this was, more of a nights and weekends project for us. But, we weren't really considering it as such. And so, it was like working two jobs at the same time. But again, being in Silicon Valley, we thought we would sort of bootstrap the first version of the product. And then the next step for us would be to go out and raise money. And so we sort of went down that path, started the process in 2007, and must have presented to, I would say, a couple of dozen venture capital firms, mainly here in the Bay Area, but, a few in New York and perhaps one in Boston. And it was, we sort of soon found out that it was going to be tough. And it was going to be tough, one, because we were, first-time entrepreneurs. As a matter of fact, I had just, and my co-founder had just graduated out of business schools. And so, and we were coming from a technology background, both of us. We are, engineers by education. And that was sort of, the experience that we had coming in. Had no experience in media per se. Digital media was in its infancy. Nobody, outside of the websites that were there, nobody really sort of understood what online video was going to be. It was very, very early, right? This was about the time when YouTube was acquired by Google. And so there was no monetization. A lot of the content that was, available on these platforms was pirated. And so, there was also this controversy around, is this even genuine, or is this something like a BitTorrent, which is, promoting piracy and, infringement of IP. And so there were sort of these two schools of thought, and we were trying to figure out, our place. But we firmly believed that, online video would, one, democratize consumption of content. And so it would be, far widely and much more accessible than what television was, which was the primary way of consuming video content back then. And we believed that it would open up new models of revenue and monetization for content owners, which is why they would come in, right? So we firmly believed in the industry, and we were both very, very interested in how digital technologies were being used to really just fundamentally reshape the media industry, which was, for the most part, controlled by, a handful of, giant behemoth media companies, right? So we felt that there was going to be a new crop of brands that would be used by consumers to consume content, etc. So anyway, so the point being that we were really excited about the industry and we really felt very strongly about it. But we also did realize, through our conversations with the firms that we were presenting to, that, they were looking for somebody who was a lot more seasoned and had a lot more experience in sort of the traditional sense of it. So that was one issue. The second issue was, again, if you sort of go back to 2007, 2008, the financial markets had just sort of started to crash, right? And so that was a big, big challenge. And as a result, we realized that in general, capital markets are going to shrink and investments are going to be far and few. And you couple that with, some of the challenges that VCs were telling us with, our setup, primarily not having the experience, we felt that it was going to be a steep hill to climb. And so as we went through the process, we did eventually get a term sheet and we were really excited. But as part of the term sheet, there was this requirement that we would either have to go out and get a seasoned executive to serve as the CEO of the company, right? Or we could sort of put the term sheet on hold, go back, work on the product, work on building out the audience, and come back to them when we had 1 million users on the platform, right? And they said that that would give them enough comfort in our ability to be able to execute on this and really grow this and scale this, right? And so we sort of looked at the setup and we didn't feel comfortable just because, the industry was in its infancy. We didn't, the product had just launched. We didn't feel like we wanted to go and get a third party and, get somebody from outside to really come in. And so that was when we made the decision that we at least choose the second option, where we put the term sheet on hold, we'll continue doing what we're doing. And then perhaps, again, if things turn out okay, we will go back and we will restart the conversation when the time was right? And that meant for us, getting to 1 million users. And so we went back to the, sort of the bootstrap setup that we had. And
were you guys full time when this decision was going on, or
no,
were you still?
No. So we were
still working other jobs, cranking away.
Yes, yeah. And so part of the thesis for the investment was that we'd be able to quit our full-time jobs and work on this full-time, et cetera, which, in retrospect, I feel like, again, is not that big of a deal. We, and as I share more, I'll tell you, we continued doing sort of, or having two jobs, and working on both a full-time job as well as this project for about 4 years after that. So, okay. So it was a significant time, but at that point in time, we decided that we'll just go back to the product. We'll, focus on building the audience. Let's just see where we can land. And so that was, I think, 2008-ish, maybe sometime. And then, eventually we got to 1 million users. We actually got to, 10 million users. And we never went back. So
you didn't need their money anymore.
Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. So we were, as we were scaling up, we were able to, we were able to start monetizing the content. We were able to start running ads. We had enough scale that, brands were interested, ad networks were interested in working with us. And so we were able to generate revenue. And I think it was in September of 2010, I believe, if I remember correctly, that then left our full-time jobs and, sort of started to take a salary. It wasn't huge, but it was, decent.
Yeah.
And sort of quit our full-time jobs and then started working on this as our, main job. Yeah.
So ultimately some of the restrictions that were going to be put on you by these VCs, they weren't acceptable. This was your baby. You wanted to be able to build it. And, right. It may have been uncomfortable to be working two jobs at once, but that was, the sacrifice you were willing to make to maintain that type of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was also, we wanted to, we weren't really thinking of this as a, big billion-dollar company that we would build. It was more about, just going through the process and learning from it, right? Even if we had failed, I think we would have been okay with the decision that we had made because we felt like we were in it more for the learning. And that's why we were sort of hedging our bets, where we were saying, okay, let's just continue with our full-time jobs. Let's see if we can get this to a stage where we can jump on this full-time, draw a salary, start hiring employees, and really sort of run this as a business, as opposed to, I think sometimes entrepreneurs make the mistake where they would quit their full-time jobs and then jump on this and start working on their startup. And that adds an additional sort of layer of pressure to the founders, because now, not only are you investing in your startup, but you're not drawing a salary, and so it just financially becomes a lot more difficult. So we were able to sort of hedge that risk by continuing to work on our full-time jobs, draw a salary, and use those funds to sort of reinvest in the business.
Well, and I guarantee if you had taken any capital, you spent the better part of 2 decades doing this now, it'd be hard to imagine that you'd still be doing it.
Right? Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like one of the advantages or benefits, and to be honest with you, if somebody had told me in 2006 that I'd still be doing this in 2023, I don't know if I would even start it. But in hindsight, I think one of the benefits of not raising the capital was the freedom that we had, the freedom to operate our business as we saw fit, and making our own decisions and choosing our own path. And just to sort of provide some context, our business is very, very different now from what we had originally started off with. It's obviously leveraging the same sort of technology and infrastructure and the product that we had built, but the focus for the business is very, very different. When we had started, our original idea was to build a video community of users that were interested in food and cooking content. So we had launched a website called ifood.tv, and the idea was, if it's 7 p.m, you want to prepare something, you can go to Google and search for recipes, and you can follow the instructions, which are text and picture based. Or you could come to our platform, and if you told us about your health-based needs, dietary preferences, restrictions, etc., we would essentially give you recipes that were catered to your needs. And so, and this was all going to be video based, right? So you could actually follow along and see how things were being prepared. And so that's really what we started with. But then, along the way, we pivoted to streaming on the big television. And so we started to launch, we initially started with launching iFood as an app on platforms such as Roku, and have now sort of expanded in that category big time. But back then in 2006, when we had started, products like Roku didn't exist. There was no streaming on the television. Right? The only streaming was if you actually physically connected your computer with an HDMI cable to your television set and then streamed. Right. So we didn't. I mean, we didn't know that we were going to end up here, but because we hadn't raised the money, and we didn't have that external pressure of reporting, justifying our decision, getting sign off on, what we wanted to do with the company, etc. We were able to very quickly pivot from that sort of desktop video model that we had to online streaming model or, television streaming model very, very quickly when we saw that there was an opportunity there.
Right.
We could be the first sort of movers in the space. And I feel like we were, pioneers in the streaming space, back in 2010, 2011 when we started. And we felt that we were maybe 3 to 5 years ahead of the curve in terms of the industry and the maturity. But it has really taken us, almost 13 years now, counting from 2010, and the pandemic for the industry, for the streaming industry to be where it is today, where, it's very mainstream to turn on your TV and, either using your smart TV, launch Netflix and start streaming directly, or maybe use an external device such as Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV to stream directly. So it's taken us a long time, and we thought that we were maybe 3 to 5 years ahead of the curve, but it always takes longer, right? And I feel like if we had raised money, we would have perhaps never been allowed to pivot to streaming because it was so early in the life cycle of the industry that not every VC would have the patience to sort of see it through. And even if we had, we would have probably been shut down a few times over.
Right.
So we felt that given the freedom that we had, and because we didn't have, I think the other thing about raising money is when you raise money, there's this pressure to spend that money and get on a certain growth curve, sorry. And because we were not sort of following that traditional, so to speak, model, we could pace ourselves and we could choose to spend where we really felt was needed and not do things that would be sexy perhaps and splashy, but not get you the business results that you want or are looking for, right? So I think it looking back, I think it had its advantages. Not to discredit venture capital. I think there's absolutely a time and place for it, and depending on the company's stage and what they're trying to do, I think there's a lot of value. But I think there is also value in bootstrapping it, at least to a certain point, especially for, I think, first-time entrepreneurs who can build the product, establish it, get the credibility. I think if we had gone back to the firm who had given us the term sheet, we could have easily raised money at that point in time because we had well exceeded the benchmarks that they had set for us.
Right.
But I think for first-time entrepreneurs, especially, I think bootstrapping is a very, very good way. One, to build up that confidence yourself that you can do this, and two, go show others that you can do this, and really then be having those discussions, fundraising discussions from a position of strength as opposed to a desperate need for capital.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, clearly it's nice to have money, right? It takes some pressure off. You got this other type of pressure that you trade into it. Yeah. One of the things that you started off saying was when you founded this business, it was you and your partner, but you had a bunch of support that was around you. How did you think about being able to reward that support of the people that were there? What made them interested in doing it? And how did you make sure that you took care of them as well?
Yeah. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis, right? So you have to look at what their aspirations are, what gets them excited. And, for some folks, it was just the excitement of being involved in something that was new, revolutionary, over the long term. And then just, learning from that experience. For some of them, that was definitely the case, but then they were also motivated financially to, potentially be able to benefit from the help that they're extending. I mean, we had some kids who helped us, who were trying to build their resumes, right? That's all they cared about, right? And so I think it's just looking at it on a case by case basis and figuring out what would motivate that person to help you, and then being able to structure something, whether it be the cash component, whether it be equity component, whether it be recommendations that you're giving to them as they're going out in the market. Could be different things and come in different flavors, but it's really on a case by case basis, I would say.
Okay. And so you talked about when you raise capital, you get put on a certain growth trajectory. There's this idea of forcing you to be on that. How did you guys think about being able to supply growth to yourself if you didn't have someone external, like kind of forcing a growth model on you? What model for growth did you think about, and what were the milestones that you looked at to do it?
Yeah. So obviously, from a milestone standpoint, when we started, and the first milestone was to get to that 1 million user benchmark that the firm had given us. But I would say, in general, from a macro standpoint, our growth philosophy has been to innovate, try many things, fail quickly, and then see what works and double down on things that have demonstrated success. I think not having capital almost forces you to have the focus that a lot of startups need. And sometimes I feel like entrepreneurs start chasing, sort of the next shiny thing that they come across. And so the product goes in multiple different directions. Employees feel that they're, doing too many things, overexerting themselves. And as a result, companies can sort of lack clear direction sometimes when that happens. And so not being forced to spend the money that we never raised, it was very, very helpful.
Right.
And because we didn't have an obligation to show what you're using that money for and what the growth would be, that meant that we could try multiple things, spend small amounts on, a bunch of those, and then see what works, and then sort of, double down on.
Right.
Double down, and it saved us a lot of time as well as investment, right, and heartache. We were forced to be very judicious on how we spent the money and invest only on things that we had a high degree of confidence will work. So, one of the things, as an example, work from home now is, especially after the pandemic, it's de facto. But when we started building out the team way back then, one of the things that we realized was that because we didn't have the capital and really hire people in Silicon Valley and New York and other big cities, we decided to build a very, very strong offshore team.
Okay.
And our model was to give them the flexibility that they needed, and really have that sort of work-life balance that we felt was missing, overseas. So from the very beginning, all of our team, this is since I would say 2007, 2008, maybe, our team has been pretty much entirely virtual. And so we set up our processes, we set up our workflows, reporting structure, etc., in such a way that people could have the comfort of working from home and really sort of define their own hours and work, when they wanted and needed, but still be available if somebody was to reach out to them or wanted to get on a phone call or whatever. We weren't doing video calls; we were using Skype for the most part,
Sure.
and it was audio conferences, but that was a model that we really embraced, right from the beginning, because we felt like it would work well, and if we can do it, then obviously it would be a lot more cost effective because we didn't have to open offices in multiple different cities and have all that infrastructure and maintenance and service and all of that. But also it would be so much more helpful because employees would save time and the sort of hassle of commuting from home to office, etc. So
Right.
so it really worked for us. But that's just one example of, because if we had raised whatever we had raised, we would have been forced to write big checks, hire a lot of people very, very quickly, open up a lot of offices, etc. Which again, not saying that it's a bad thing, but it sort of forced us to be a little more innovative, and we're benefiting the rewards obviously now, because we've got a substantial team, and a lot of our folks have been with us for 10 plus years.
Well, I was looking at some stats earlier in the week. You're more likely to fail if you are venture backed rather than bootstrapped. It's something like 60% of VC backed companies fail.
Yeah,
like 40% for bootstrapped, and so that additional pressure, they're looking for binary result.
Yes.
When you think about, so the one thing that's interesting about, getting involved with a VC or some external capital is you get into their ecosystem. So you've got advice that's coming from a bunch of people, good or bad, right? You've got advice that's coming from folks, you get a board that's built up, things like that.
Yeah.
Given the fact that you didn't have that and you were young entrepreneurs, where were you going to get the mentorship that would have been valuable for you to build your company?
I would say for the most part, just reading a lot of books, online forums, things like that. And I would not undermine, that sort of benefit of that sort of help and support structure that you get with external investment. I think that's something that I've personally felt that, if we had, it would have been very helpful. But we've participated in like local programs, bootstrapping programs. For example, there's a program called 1M by 1M, which is actually run by a good friend here in the Bay Area, and it basically focuses on bootstrapping, and a lot of sort of the mentorship and guidance, came from there as an example, and a lot of the stuff that Shramana was putting out. But for the most part, it was tapping into your own network, getting introductions through your own network, reaching out to folks, and then whatever you can read up from books that you can find. Okay,
got it. So with the benefit of hindsight, Vikrant to 2023 Vikrant talking to 2006 Vikrant, what would you suggest doing differently along the way, just knowing how your life looks like now?
Yeah, I feel like you just, in terms of fundraising, we went through some phases where we felt like we should have raised money. There are, even though we had the benefit of sort of being in the industry very, very early on, and we've grown with it, and I feel like in our own small way, we've helped the industry grow. There are certain things that I feel like we missed the ball on from a product standpoint. And that's where I felt like if we had more resources, we would have probably, again, perhaps because of the push that we would have gotten externally, we would have probably been forced to, try some of those other things and really sort of, become a more meaningful player within the industry in that space. So that's, and again, I don't honestly, as I look back, I think just the circumstances were such that we were a little distracted when all of that was happening within the industry, because, we were going through sort of some M&A conversations and whatnot. And so we were more focused there. And, given those conversations, the future for the company was a little bit unclear. So we didn't want to go out and start investing in things that perhaps wouldn't be needed or be very useful post M&A had that happened. So we were sort of caught in this limbo state. for a little bit there, and missed the sort of ball on some things that have happened in the industry. But besides that, I think honestly, even if we had tried to spend more, hire more people, I don't know if we would have done things differently, because the industry was not ready. I think one other thing was we started with food and then we expanded into other categories. So now the business that we have essentially has two sort of lines. We have our owned and operated apps and channels that we run, where similar to Netflix, users can find us on Roku, Amazon Fire, etc. They can download the app. There's a lot of free content, movies, TV shows, etc., that they can watch for free and supported with advertising. And these are our own and operated apps and brands. And then we have sort of a technology platform side of the business where we leverage the technology that we've built and we use it with other media brands who may want to white label it and use it to launch their apps and channels. And what I would say is, I think, again, I felt like trying to be more focused. I think we hung on to so as we started to expand from food, as we launched a channel for kids and family, we launched travel channels, we launched fitness channels, etc. And I feel like we hung on to sort of that lifestyle category for much longer than we perhaps should have.
Okay.
We eventually, got into movies and television, which is mainstream entertainment, and that's really when the company started to take off.
Okay.
And so it took us a little bit to realize that the content that we had, the lifestyle content, etc. It was very instructional in nature. It was how to make cold pasta, chicken salad recipe, that type of stuff.
Right.
And it works, but nobody's going to watch how to make chocolate cake unless they really need to make chocolate cake. So when it comes to TV consumption, we realized a little bit later that what works on TV is what people have always been watching on TV, which is mainstream entertainment, movies, TV shows.
Yeah.
So again, looking back, I would say from a content perspective, I would have liked for us to expand into movies and television as a category and genre much earlier than what we did. And then I would have liked for us to, from a technical standpoint, expand into some other streams of lines of businesses within the industry, but different formats, etc., much earlier.
Right. Okay, so it's about 37 minutes after the hour. I want to be able to open it up for questions. So really great to hear some of the baseline stuff. I think that the intention on being bootstrapped doesn't always have to be there for that to be an ideal scenario. Yeah. But Vikrant, thanks a ton. And we'll move to questions in just a moment. Thanks.
Sure.